I never used to think much about late-night convenience store runs. They were just part of life, especially during the summer when the heat made it impossible to sleep. That night was no different. It was one of the hottest days of the year, the kind where the pavement felt like it was radiating heat even after sunset. My kids, tired of sitting in our cramped apartment, had begged me to take them down to the 7-Eleven a few blocks away to get some big gulps. It wasn't far, just a 10-minute walk, and the streets were still buzzing with people cooling off outside their buildings. The city never really slept, but this part of town had its quiet pockets, especially near the park we had to pass to get there. I didn't think twice about it. My daughter Ava was holding my hand, and my son Leo was a few steps ahead, bouncing on his heels with excitement. We weren't in any rush. It was just a simple errand, something I'd done 100 times before. And then, out of nowhere, they appeared. A couple stepped out from the tree line near the edge of the park. At first glance, they didn't seem out of place. Just two well-dressed people, maybe in their late 20s, looking like they had just come from dinner or an office party. The man was wearing a button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled up, slacks, and polished shoes. The woman had on a sleek black dress, her hair neatly styled. They walked toward us with purpose. I assumed they were just heading for the sidewalk, but as they got closer, something felt off. I tightened my grip on Ava's hand, a habit I had whenever strangers got too close. My gut was already sounding alarms, but I ignored them. It was broad daylight. Well, almost. The sun had just dipped below the skyline, leaving an orange glow across the city. Then the man spoke. "Give me your wallet. Now." For a second, I thought I had misheard him. He didn't say it like a typical mugger. No aggression, no urgency. Just a calm, even voice, like he was asking for the time. I let out a nervous laugh. "You serious?" The man's expression didn't change. But then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folding knife. He flicked it open with one hand, the blade catching the last bit of sunlight. I instinctively stepped in front of Ava. My heart was pounding, but I tried to stay calm. "Look, man, I don't have much cash on me. You don't have to do this." I could feel Ava trembling behind me. Leo had stopped bouncing, his face pale. He was old enough to understand what was happening. The woman, who had been silent this whole time, suddenly moved. Quick as a snake, she reached out and grabbed Leo's wrist. "Let go of him," I shouted, stepping toward her, but the man lunged forward. A sharp, cold pain shot through my side. For a moment, I didn't even realize what had happened. I just felt wrong, off balance. And then I looked down. The knife was buried in my side, just below my ribs. I gasped, trying to take a breath, but my lungs weren't working right. My legs felt weak. Ava screamed. Leo twisted in the woman's grip, kicking at her. "Get off me!" he yelled, and in that instant, something inside me snapped. I didn't feel the pain anymore. All I felt was pure, blinding rage. I swung at the woman. I don't even remember doing it, but my fist connected with her jaw so hard she crumpled to the ground. Blood sprayed from her mouth, and she let out a wail, clutching her face like she was the victim here. The man yanked the knife free from my side, and I staggered, barely staying on my feet. I braced myself for another attack, but then, "Hey, what the hell's going on?" Two joggers had spotted us from down the sidewalk and were running toward us. The man's eyes darted between me and them, his jaw clenching. Then, without another word, he turned and ran. The woman stayed on the ground, whimpering. Maybe she thought playing the victim would keep her from getting arrested. My knees buckled and I hit the pavement hard. I could hear someone screaming, and for a second, I thought it was Ava, until I realized it was the woman, still clutching her bloody mouth. The cops arrived minutes later, and that's when the real nightmare began. Even with a knife wound, I was treated more like a suspect than a victim. The woman, despite having been part of an attempted robbery and kidnapping, started spinning a story that I had attacked her. The police actually questioned me like I was some violent lunatic who had gone after a well-dressed couple for no reason. It didn't help that the joggers, though well-meaning, had seen the scene from a distance and assumed the woman and I were a couple having a domestic dispute. My kids had to be the ones to tell them the truth, that she and the man had tried to take my son. Eventually, the pieces fell into place. The woman's real story came out. She was the daughter of a wealthy family but had spiraled into addiction after getting involved with a group of trust fund junkies in the city. She and her partner had been targeting random people for quick cash, but this time, it wasn't just about money. They had tried to take my son. Why? That's the part that still keeps me up at night. The police later found out that they had been involved in similar incidents before, luring kids away under the guise of a robbery, though no one knew what happened to those kids afterward. That thought haunts me. The man was never caught. He disappeared into the city like a ghost. The woman, however, was convicted of attempted kidnapping. Her family tried to push for charges against me, said I had assaulted their daughter. The case was thrown out, but the fact that they even tried, I still can't wrap my head around it. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital, a tube in my chest to drain the blood from my collapsed lung. The pain was unbearable, but all I cared about was that my kids were safe. Even now, years later, I still run through the what-ifs. What if I hadn't fought back fast enough? What if the joggers hadn't come by? What if the knife had landed just an inch higher? I don't take late-night walks anymore, and I never go to 7-Eleven without watching my back. I never thought working the night shift at a 7-Eleven would put me face to face with someone who had taken a life. But that's exactly what happened one cold night in early November. It was a quiet shift, the kind where the hum of the refrigerators and the occasional passing car were the only sounds keeping me company. I'd been working there for about 6 months ever since I dropped out of college. Bills needed paying and I needed a job, so here I was, stuck behind the counter, watching the minutes crawl by. It was almost 2 a.m. when he walked in. A man in a charcoal gray suit, slightly disheveled, like he'd been wearing it all day. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly out of place, and the stink of alcohol clung to him like a second skin. I noticed the sway in his step as he made his way to the back of the store, straight to the refrigerated drinks. At first, I assumed he was just another drunk, the kind that wandered in from the bars downtown. But something about him was different, too put together, too sharp for the usual crowd of wasted college kids or staggering blue-collar workers. He moved with purpose, yanking open the glass door and grabbing every Starbucks cold brew he could carry. He dumped them on the counter in front of me with a loud thunk. I started scanning them, the beeps of the register filling the silence. The smell of whiskey hit me full force as he exhaled, and I couldn't help myself. I asked, "Rough night or a good one?" That's when he laughed. Not just any laugh, but a deep, hearty one, like I'd just told the best joke he'd ever heard. "A little of both," he said, shaking his head. Then, almost too casually, he added, "Just got out of court. They acquitted me." I hesitated. "Acquitted?" "For an accident," he said. "Couple years back, I was out hunting with a buddy. Pulled the trigger at the wrong time. Poor bastard never saw it coming." The air in the store felt suddenly heavy. I swallowed hard, my fingers frozen on the register. "I'm sorry," I said. It was the only thing that came to mind. He laughed again, softer this time, like he was remembering something funny. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled $10 bill, and handed it to me. "You know what the funniest thing is, though?" he asked. I shook my head slowly, taking the money from his hand. My fingers brushed against his, and they were ice cold. He leaned in just a little, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "There was no accident." For a second, I forgot to breathe. The words felt like a punch to the gut, knocking all the air out of me. My hands trembled as I counted out his change. He just stood there, watching me, a smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. I wanted to say something, but what the hell do you say to someone who just admitted to murder like it was nothing? I dropped his change into his open palm, my hands clammy. He pocketed it, scooped up the cold brews, and turned toward the door. As he walked out, my mind started racing. "Please get into the passenger seat. Please let someone else be driving." But no. He climbed right into the driver's seat of a black sedan, started the engine, and pulled out onto the road. I stood there, heart pounding, watching his taillights disappear into the night. Then, almost instinctively, I found myself repeating his license plate number under my breath as I grabbed my phone and typed it into my notes. My fingers hovered over the call button. He had already gotten away with one death. I wasn't about to let him take another. I dialed 911. The dispatcher picked up almost instantly. 911. What's your emergency? I took a deep breath. Yeah, I just had a guy come into the store. He's wasted, and he just drove off. He admitted to killing someone. There was a slight pause. Can you describe him? I rattled off everything I could remember. Gray suit, dark hair, mid-40s, reeked of whiskey. I gave them the license plate number, my voice shaking. Did he make any threats toward you? No, but he wasn't joking. He meant it. Another pause. Stay on the line, sir. I heard muffled voices in the background. The dispatcher came back a few seconds later. Officers are being dispatched to locate the vehicle. Do you have security cameras at your location? Yeah. We'll need that footage. A unit will be by shortly. I hung up, my hands still shaking. About 20 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up outside. 2 officers stepped out, a man and a woman, both wearing the same unreadable cop expressions. You the one who called? The female officer asked as she stepped inside. Yeah, I said. He was drunk. Said some really messed up stuff. Let's see the footage. I led them to the back office where the ancient security system was still recording. I rewound the footage and let it play. There he was, walking in, grabbing the cold brews, laughing at his own sick joke. The audio wasn't great, but it was clear enough. The officers exchanged glances. You said he was acquitted? The male officer asked. Yeah, today. He said it happened a few years ago. A hunting accident. The female officer exhaled through her nose, shaking her head. We'll run his plates, see if we can find anything. They took a copy of the footage and my statement, then left. I was left standing in the back room, the hum of the security monitors filling the silence. I didn't sleep when I got home. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. Heard that laugh. 3 days later, there was a knock at my apartment door. I peered through the peephole. 2 men. Suits. Not cops. FBI. My stomach twisted. I opened the door, my throat dry. Are you the one who called 911 about a man at 7-Eleven? The taller one asked. I nodded. You mind answering a few questions? I let them in, my mind racing. They sat me down and pulled out a folder. Inside was a mugshot, the man in the suit. His name is Richard Calloway, the agent said. You were right to call. We've been watching him for a while. I swallowed hard. So he really did kill someone? The agent's expression didn't change. Not just one. My blood ran cold. He's suspected in at least 3 deaths over the past decade, but he's careful, smart, never leaves enough evidence. The hunting accident was just the one he got caught for. My mouth went dry. So what happens now? The agent leaned forward. Now, we keep watching, and if you see him again, he handed me a card. You call us, immediately. I never saw Richard Calloway again, but some nights, when I'm alone, I still hear his voice. There was no accident. And I wonder, how many other people has he laughed about? I never thought much about how fragile life was until the night I almost lost mine. It was a regular shift at the 7-Eleven I worked at. One of those mind-numbing, dead-end jobs that just paid the bills. I had no real ambition, no real direction. I showed up, stocked shelves, rang up customers, and counted the hours until I could go home. It wasn't a career. It wasn't even a stepping stone. It was just something I did because I had to. The store itself was a rundown little place, tucked between a laundromat and a liquor store in a part of town where nothing ever felt quite safe. The kind of place where you'd see the same drunks stumbling in at 2 a.m. for cigarettes, the same wide-eyed tweakers looking for an excuse to loiter near the coffee machine. I worked the graveyard shift, which meant I was alone most of the time, save for the occasional security guard who'd do a lazy drive-by in the parking lot. That night started out like any other. I was behind the counter scrolling on my phone between customers, barely aware of the fluorescent hum of the overhead lights. Then, out of nowhere, a headache hit me. Not a normal headache. It was sudden, crushing, like someone had taken a steel pipe to the back of my skull. I winced, gripping the counter to steady myself. My vision blurred at the edges. "Shit," I muttered under my breath. I reached for the bottle of aspirin I kept under the register, dry swallowing 2 pills. I figured it was just stress, or maybe I was dehydrated. Either way, I shook it off and got back to work. A customer walked in a few minutes later, some guy in his 40s buying a coffee and a pack of donuts. I rang him up, swiped his card, and then nothing. When I woke up, I wasn't in the store anymore. I was in a hospital bed. Bright lights, the sharp scent of antiseptic, the distant murmur of voices and the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. My body felt heavy, like I was sinking into the mattress. "What?" My throat was dry. A nurse leaned over me. "You're awake. Good. Just try to relax, okay?" My mind was sluggish, trying to piece together what had happened. "You had a seizure," she explained. "Collapsed at work. Someone called an ambulance." A seizure? I'd never had anything like that before. My body felt fine, no pain, no real weakness. But then she said something that made my stomach drop. The doctors ran some scans and, "You have a brain bleed." I stared at her. "A what?" "It's serious," she said gently. "They need to operate." Operate. That word lodged itself in my throat like a shard of glass. Before I could process it, more people entered the room. Doctors, nurses. They were prepping me for surgery. One of them was explaining the procedure, talking about drilling into my skull to relieve the pressure. I could barely focus on the words. My heart was racing. Then, just as they were about to put me under, a man burst into the room. "Stop the surgery," he said, his voice urgent. Everyone froze. I turned my head slightly, trying to focus on him. He was older, in his 50s, wearing a white coat with a name tag I couldn't quite read. The head of neurology. "The scan results just came back," he said. "This isn't a standard brain bleed. It's an aneurysm. If you drill, you'll kill him." The room fell silent. They didn't operate. Instead, they monitored me, adjusting my medication, making sure the aneurysm hadn't ruptured further. I spent the next few days in a hospital bed, unable to do much but think about how close I'd come to dying. One wrong diagnosis, one misstep, and I would have been dead on the table. Later, my doctor sat down with me and explained it in detail. "With a brain bleed, drilling into the skull relieves pressure and prevents further damage," he said. "But with an aneurysm, the sudden drop in pressure would have caused it to burst. You would have bled out instantly. I would have died. Not in some dramatic, meaningful way. Not in a moment that mattered. I would have died in the back of a shitty 7-Eleven, ringing up a customer for a pack of donuts." Something about that realization broke me. I quit my job the moment I was well enough to leave the hospital. I went back home, back to my parents' place. And for the first time in my life, I thought about what I actually wanted to do. Not what I had to do to survive. Not what was expected of me, but what I wanted. I'd always loved art, drawing, sketching, creating something out of nothing. But I'd never considered it a real career. It was just a hobby, something I did when I had time. But after nearly dying, I couldn't ignore it anymore. So I told my parents, "I want to be a comic book artist." They didn't get it. Not at first. But they'd almost lost me. And I think that changed something for them too. They let me move back in. Let me take the time I needed to train, to build a portfolio, to figure things out. And now, I'm doing it. I don't make a ton of money. I'm not famous. But for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm actually living. I suppose I'm telling you this because I hope you can live that way too. Because the truth is, life is terrifyingly fragile. One weak blood vessel in your brain, one wrong move from a doctor, one ordinary night at work, and it can all be over. And what scares me the most? Some people never even get the chance to chase what they love. They die stocking shelves. They die behind a register. They die in places they never wanted to be. And that to me is more horrifying than anything else in this world. I never thought much about night shifts. Sure, they were a little eerie, especially when the store was nearly empty, but I liked the quiet. I'd been working at Stan's Market, a small 24-hour convenience store off a highway exit for about 6 months. Most nights were uneventful. Drunks looking for snacks, exhausted truckers grabbing coffee, the occasional kid trying to sneak a beer past me. Nothing ever felt dangerous. That changed one night in October, when a man walked in just before my shift was about to end. I took the job because it was close to my apartment, and I needed something to cover my rent while finishing school. I lived alone, a tiny one-bedroom above an old laundromat. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. My shifts were mostly 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., the kind that made you hate the sun when you finally crawled into bed. I had a simple routine. Keep my head down, be polite, but distant. Never give out personal info. Working nights at a gas station/convenience store wasn't glamorous, but I was used to dealing with weird customers. It was never terrifying. Until him. It started like any other night. 10:45 p.m. The cooler buzzed in the background, and the dull flicker of the security cameras reminded me how alone I was. My co-worker David was stocking shelves in the back, leaving me at the register. That's when he walked in. Tall, maybe mid-40s. Stringy brown hair, greasy like he hadn't washed it in days. His jacket was too big for him, swallowing his frame and his eyes. Something was off about them. He grabbed a bottle of Coke, a pack of gum, and a can of beer before strolling to the counter. "Hey there," he said, his voice too friendly. "You're real pretty." I forced a polite smile. "That'll be $6.25. He leaned on the counter instead of pulling out his wallet. "What time you off?" I froze. Most people who asked that were harmless. Drunks making conversation, lonely guys trying their luck. But his tone was different. His eyes didn't leave my face. I lied. 11 p.m. Even though I was really off at midnight. He smiled. "Good. I'll wait outside. Maybe grab a drink together." I laughed, pretending it was just a joke. "Nah, my boyfriend's picking me up." That was another lie. I didn't have a boyfriend. But the words slipped out, instinctual like a reflex when you feel cornered. His expression didn't change. He just stood there, staring. Then he muttered, "I'll make him see things my way." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. He paid for his things and walked out. Midnight. My shift was finally over. I grabbed my purse and stepped outside, relieved to be heading home. But then a car door opened, about 20 feet away, parked under the streetlight, and I felt my stomach twist. It was him. He stepped out slowly, like he'd been waiting the whole time. I turned on my heel without hesitation, heading straight back inside. David looked up, confused as I pushed past him. "What's wrong?" I barely breathed as I whispered, "Just say I'm on break." Not a second later, the bell above the door chimed. "Oh, her?" David said. "She's just on break. Should be out in a minute." I held my breath. Silence. Then, footsteps. He left. That was the first night he waited for me. But it wasn't the last. The next night, I took an Uber home instead of the bus. I asked the driver, Nick, to take a weird route just in case. Good thing I did. Because when I looked in the mirror, I saw his car, following us. The next few weeks were hell. He'd wait outside the store. He'd stare through the windows. Sometimes he'd come inside just to buy a soda or gum, acting like everything was normal. I started spending half my paycheck on Ubers. Nick, the driver from the first night, became my regular. He started waiting for me, making sure I got home safe. One night, I whispered to him, "I think he's following us." Nick didn't ask questions. He changed the route immediately, looping into the city until we lost him. That night, I cried in the back seat. Nick tried to refuse my tip, but I shoved the cash into his hand. "Please take it," I begged. I didn't want this to be anyone else's problem. Eventually, Nick convinced me to go to the police. I walked into the station, shaking. I told them everything. You know what they said? "Has he hurt you?" I swallowed. "No." "Has he threatened you?" I hesitated. "Not directly." The officer sighed. "Then we can't do much. But if he touches you, call us." I wanted to scream. One night he got bolder. It was 3 a.m. The store was empty. He walked in, silent. Didn't buy anything. Just stood near the counter, watching me. I pretended to check my phone, pretending he wasn't there. Then, he leaned in. I don't like being lied to. I nearly dropped my phone. That was it. I grabbed the store phone and dialed 911 right in front of him. He laughed. Then, he left. It took months of paperwork, court dates, and me fearing for my life every single night before a judge finally approved a restraining order. And just like that, he vanished. No more car waiting outside, no more eyes watching me, no more fear. The first night I walked outside and he wasn't there, I broke down crying. I called Nick. "I think I'm finally free." He picked me up and we drove around the city, celebrating. If I learned anything, it's this. Don't wait to involve the cops. Don't be nice to creeps. Never let your guard down. And most importantly, always trust your instincts. Because sometimes, when you feel like you're being hunted, you are. I was 21 when this happened. I remember it clearly because it was right after my birthday in December. The kind of night where the cold slaps your face the second you step outside, biting into your skin like tiny needles. A snowstorm had just passed through earlier that day, leaving behind a thick, icy mess on the roads. At the time, I was still living with my parents. My mom wasn't a fan of driving in the snow, so when she asked me to take her to the nearby 7-Eleven to pick up some cigarettes and a few other things, I didn't think twice. I wasn't doing anything important, just watching TV, so I grabbed my keys and followed her out. The moment I stepped outside, the cold wind nearly stole my breath. It had to be in the teens, freezing enough that the roads were slick with ice. We had an old Honda Accord, nothing fancy, but reliable. I started it up, letting the heat kick in while my mom buckled herself into the passenger seat. The 7-Eleven was about 5 minutes away, but the icy roads forced me to take it slow. It ended up taking nearly 10 minutes to get there, my tires sliding slightly at every stop sign. The parking lot was mostly empty, just one other car parked near the entrance. I pulled into a spot close to the door so my mom wouldn't have to walk far in the cold. She got out, tightening her coat around her as she hurried inside. I stayed in the car, keeping the engine running and scrolling through my phone. It was one of those quiet nights. No other customers, just the hum of the heater and the occasional flicker of the streetlight above me. That's when I noticed the black pickup truck. It pulled into the parking lot way too fast for how icy the roads were, sliding slightly before coming to a stop right next to my car. I remember thinking it was weird. The whole parking lot was empty. Why park right next to me? But I brushed it off. Maybe they just wanted to be close to the entrance. It was freezing after all. A minute passed. No one got out. I frowned, glancing at the truck's passenger side window. I could barely make out a figure sitting inside, facing in my direction. Something about it sent a small chill down my spine, but I told myself I was being paranoid. Right then, my mom walked out of the store. She pulled her coat tighter, balancing a small bag in one hand as she approached the car. That's when I glanced at the truck again. The figure in the passenger seat was still staring directly at me. Mom opened the door and got in, rubbing her hands together for warmth. "What are you looking at?" she asked. I nodded toward the truck. "That thing pulled up a few minutes ago, but no one's gotten out. There's someone sitting in the passenger seat just watching us." She turned her head slightly, just enough to see the truck without making it obvious. "They're probably waiting for someone inside," she muttered, but there was uncertainty in her voice. "Let's just go." I nodded, shifting the car into reverse. That's when the passenger door of the truck flew open, slamming into the side of my car hard. I hit the brakes instantly. Before I could react, a man stepped out, tall, built like a linebacker, heavy boots crunching in the snow. His face was shadowed under the dim parking lot lights, but I could see the tension in his shoulders as he turned to face us. My stomach dropped. I had never been in an accident before, let alone something like this. My mom sat stiffly beside me, gripping the bag in her lap. The man threw his hands up, staring right at me, angry. I cracked my window just slightly. "Sorry, man. I didn't see your door open. I was already backing out." He didn't speak right away, just stood there. Then, in a voice way too calm, he said, "Roll your window down a little more. I can barely hear you." Something in me knew that was a lie. It was dead silent outside. No wind, no traffic, nothing. He could hear me just fine. I shook my head. "Nah, man, it's freezing. I'd rather keep it up." That's when his expression changed. His jaw clenched, and his eyes darkened with something almost predatory. "Roll it down." His voice was sharper now. I swallowed hard. "I'd rather not." He exploded. Bam! His palm slammed against my window, making me jump back in my seat. My mom screamed. "Get us out of here," she shrieked. I wanted to, but the guy was right next to my car. If I reversed, I might hit him, and something told me that would only make things worse. He hit the window again, then again. Then he punched it. Hard. The glass shook, but didn't break. Inside the store, I could see the cashier watching now, phone to his ear. He must have been calling the cops. But I couldn't wait for that. The man started kicking my door now, his breath visible in the cold air. His face twisted with rage like some kind of switch had flipped in his head. I knew if we didn't get out right now, we weren't getting out at all. I put the car in reverse and slammed on the gas. The tires skidded on the ice, but I managed to back out just as the guy lunged toward us. He barely missed us by inches. I turned the wheel and gunned it toward the road, but before I could breathe a sigh of relief, my rearview mirror filled with headlights. The truck. They were following us. I swallowed panic as I sped toward home, my mom frantically calling my dad. "They're behind us," I hissed, watching the truck keep pace with me despite the icy roads. "There's two of them." "Dad's meeting us halfway," my mom gasped. "Keep driving." I didn't slow down. I didn't care about sliding. I just needed to put as much distance as possible between us and them. A few minutes later, headlights appeared ahead. I recognized the Ford F-150 immediately. My dad's truck. I nearly choked on relief as I saw him swerve onto the shoulder ahead of us, waiting. The pickup truck behind me noticed him too. I saw their brake lights flicker, hesitating. My dad stepped out, and he was holding his 9mm pistol, aiming it right at them. "I suggest," he called out, his voice booming, "you two get back in your truck and drive the hell away before I put a bullet in both your heads." For a moment, no one moved. Then the passenger, the same guy who had attacked my car, grinned. "You're lucky you got here when you did," he said. Then they sped off into the night. I sat there, my heart hammering in my chest. My dad walked up to my window. "You okay?" I exhaled shakily. "Yeah, just scared as hell." He followed us home that night, just to make sure they didn't come back. I don't know what those men wanted, but I do know, if my dad hadn't shown up, they weren't going to let us leave alive. I had just turned 18 and finally had my own car. It wasn't anything fancy, an old Toyota Corolla with a dented bumper and a temperamental air conditioner. But it was mine. Freedom. Independence. I could go wherever I wanted, whenever I wanted. And the first place I planned to visit? My cousins in the next state over. It was about a 6-hour drive, mostly highway, and I was excited. My mom had finally agreed to let me take the trip alone, though not without her usual warnings. Don't stop anywhere sketchy, keep your doors locked, call me when you get there. I nodded along, promising to be careful. The first few hours of the drive were peaceful. Music blasting, windows cracked, the hum of the road beneath me. But by the time I hit the 3-hour mark, I realized I needed gas. I hadn't been paying attention, and now my gauge was dangerously close to empty. I cursed under my breath. The highway was dark and mostly empty, and gas stations were few and far between. When I finally spotted a sign for a 7-Eleven at the next exit, I didn't hesitate. I pulled off the highway and followed the small, dimly lit road leading to the store. It was one of those old-school 7-Elevens, the kind with flickering neon lights in a rundown parking lot. A single streetlight buzzed overhead, casting long, eerie shadows. There were only 2 other cars parked outside, one by the gas pumps and another near the side of the building. I parked at a pump, locked my doors out of habit, and stepped out. The air was cool, the silence thick. I could hear the distant hum of crickets and the occasional whoosh of a passing car on the highway. As I walked inside, a small bell jingled above the door. The store was nearly empty, save for a single man browsing near the refrigerated drinks. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe early 30s. Tall, scruffy, wearing a faded hoodie and ripped jeans. Something about him felt off. He glanced at me as I walked in, his gaze lingering just a little too long. I ignored it and headed toward the back, where the coolers lined the wall. I grabbed a bottle of water and some chips, but as I reached for the handle of the cooler door, I noticed the man had moved. He was now near the drinks, his eyes flicking toward me. I brushed it off. Maybe he was just grabbing something too. But when I moved to a different aisle, he followed. I tested it a couple of times, pretending to browse in random sections. Each time he repositioned himself nearby. Something was wrong. I decided I'd grab what I had and check out. I walked up to the counter, but there was no cashier. A small sign sat on the register. "Be right back." I sighed, tapping my fingers against the counter. I could feel the man behind me now, standing too close. I could smell the faint scent of cigarettes and something else. Something stale. Then he spoke. "Late night for you?" His voice was casual, but there was something calculated in the way he said it. I didn't turn around. "Yeah." "Long drive?" I stiffened. How did he know that? I didn't answer. Instead, I stepped away from the counter, pretending to look at the small selection of candy bars near the register. In my peripheral vision, I saw him pull out his phone and start texting. His eyes darted toward the front door. I suddenly had a very, very bad feeling. Where was the cashier? And why was this guy acting like he was waiting for something? I decided to leave. Forget the gas, forget the snacks, I just wanted to get out of there. I turned toward the door, but as soon as I did, he moved too, cutting off my path. "Hey," he said, smiling. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was tight-lipped, forced. "You got a name?" I forced a laugh, trying to keep my voice steady. "Nah, man. Just trying to get home." He didn't move. For the first time, I noticed something in his hand. A single, unopened beef jerky stick. That was it. He had been following me around the store, pretending to browse, and that was all he grabbed? Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave. I took a step back. I forgot my wallet. Gotta run to my car. I turned quickly, but as I reached for the door, I felt it, his hand grabbing at my sleeve. I ripped away from him and bolted outside. That's when I saw them. 2 more men. They had been waiting around the corner of the building just out of sight. As soon as I stepped outside, they started moving toward me. I ran. I could hear their footsteps pounding against the pavement behind me. My car was only a few feet away, but in that moment it felt like miles. I fumbled with my keys, yanking open the door just as one of them lunged. He grabbed my jacket, but I twisted, throwing my full weight into the car and slamming the door shut. I locked it, my hands shaking as I jammed the key into the ignition. Through the windshield, I saw them. 3 men, standing in the dim light, staring at me. One of them tried the passenger door. The lock held. I didn't wait. I threw the car into reverse, nearly hitting the gas pump as I peeled out of the lot. My tires screeched against the pavement, the entire car shuddering as I took the corner too fast. In my rearview mirror, I saw them standing there, watching me go. I drove. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I didn't even realize I was crying until my vision blurred. I called the police as soon as I reached the next town. By the time they got to the 7-Eleven, the men were gone. The cashier? They found him tied up in the back room, terrified but unharmed. The store had security cameras, but the footage was grainy. The men hadn't bothered to cover their faces, but they also hadn't used credit cards or anything traceable. They were just gone. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't trusted my gut, if I had hesitated even a second longer. Now, whenever I take that drive, I make sure my tank is full before I leave. I carry a knife with me at all times, and I never, ever stop at an empty gas station in the middle of the night. I never wanted to work at 7-Eleven. It was just one of those jobs I ended up with after high school because I had no other options. Bills needed paying, and I wasn't in college, so the graveyard shift seemed like an easy way to make some money while avoiding too much social interaction. The store was on the outskirts of town, right off the highway exit, which meant we got a mix of truckers, drunks, and the occasional weirdos rolling in during the late hours. But honestly, most nights were boring. After midnight, we locked the doors and only allowed people in if they were paying for gas with cash at the register. That was the rule. It made my job simple: clean, restock, and kill time until morning. I liked it that way. It was peaceful. At least it was until that night. Monday nights were the quietest. I had been on shift for an hour, and the only people I had seen were a couple of truckers fueling up, and a woman who paid for cigarettes. By midnight, I was already ahead of schedule, mopping the aisles before I even locked the doors. Right as I finished mopping near the soda machines, I glanced at the clock. 12:03 a.m. Shit, I muttered, realizing I had forgotten to lock the door. I put the mop back in the bucket and headed to the entrance. As I flipped the open sign to closed, I saw something out of the corner of my eye, a figure walking in from the gas pumps. At first, I thought it was just a customer coming in late, but when I turned my head fully, I felt my stomach drop. The man was huge. I don't just mean tall, I mean unnaturally big. He had to be at least 7 feet, and his shoulders were nearly as wide as the door. His clothes were too small for him, stretched tight across his body, and his arms hung low, almost ape-like. His face was strange, with deep-set eyes and a stretched-out grin that didn't quite look real. And the worst part? He was staring right at me. I instinctively locked the door, double-checking that the latch was secure. The man never broke eye contact. He stepped closer, reaching the glass door. His lips moved slightly like he was mumbling something, but I couldn't hear it. Then he knocked. Tap, tap, tap. Not loud, not aggressive, just rhythmic, like he had all the time in the world. I shook my head and pointed to the close sign. "We're closed." He tilted his head, the grin fading. Then he knocked again, faster this time. Tap, 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 tap. A chill ran down my spine. I turned away, trying to ignore him, just let him get bored and leave. For a moment it was quiet. I exhaled, relieved. Maybe he was just some strange drifter. Maybe he'd move on. But when I looked back at the door, I nearly dropped the mop. He was still there. Only now he was crouched down, his massive hands pressed against the glass, his eyes level with mine. He was grinning again. "Open up," he whispered, his voice muffled through the glass. "I want a Slurpee." I forced a smile, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sorry, man, we're closed." His expression dropped. His grin twisted into a deep frown, and he shook his head slowly. "Slurpee." His voice was deeper now. "I want a Slurpee." I stayed silent. Then, without another word, he stood up and started walking away, slowly, almost lazily, disappearing into the darkness by the gas pumps. I exhaled, my heart pounding. That was weird as hell, but at least he was gone. I finished mopping as quickly as I could, drained the bucket, and took a break in the back room while the floors dried. When I came back to the front 15 minutes later, I stopped dead in my tracks. The man was back, and this time, he was standing next to a car. The car that wasn't his, a silver sedan, was parked at Pump 4, but something felt off. The driver's seat was occupied. There was a man slumped over inside, unmoving. But the giant wasn't looking at him. He was looking at me. As soon as our eyes met, he started walking back to the door. Number. I felt my pulse hammering as he reached the entrance and knocked again. "Pump 4, he said, voice flat. I swallowed. "How are you paying?" His lips curled into a grin. "Cash." My stomach dropped. I had no choice. The rule was clear. If a customer was paying cash for gas, I had to let them in. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the lock. Everything in my body screamed at me not to open the door. But I did. The moment the lock clicked, I backed away toward the register. The door creaked open and he stepped inside. He moved slowly, his huge frame making the store feel claustrophobic. I forced myself to speak. "How much are you putting on Pump 4? He didn't answer. Instead, he took one step closer, then another, and then he grabbed me. His massive hand clamped onto my collar, yanking me forward. My feet lifted off the ground as he hoisted me over the counter like I weighed nothing. His breath was hot against my face as he screamed, "Slurpee! I want a Slurpee!" I panicked. My arms flailed. My legs kicked wildly. I thought he was going to slam me down, break me in half. But in my panic, I managed to push both feet against his chest and kick with everything I had. He stumbled back, his grip loosening just enough for me to drop. I hit the floor hard but didn't waste a second. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted to the bathroom. I slammed the door shut and locked it. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking, and called 911. "I need help. Some guy just attacked me at 7-Eleven. He's huge. Thud. Something hit the door. I held my breath. Thud, thud, thud. Slow, heavy knocks. Then, silence. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just waited. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the distant sound of sirens. By the time the police arrived, the man was gone, but the car outside wasn't. When the cops checked it, they found the driver unconscious, his head slumped against the window. He had been strangled. We reviewed the security footage. The giant had walked up to the car the moment it pulled in. He had smashed the driver's window with his bare hands, then dragged the man down before taking his place beside the vehicle. But here's the thing, he was never caught. Despite his massive size, despite his unmistakable face, the police never found him. How does someone like that just disappear? I don't know. But I do know one thing. If he ever comes back, I won't be here to see it. I quit the next morning, and I never set foot in a 7-Eleven again. I never thought much about danger when I first started working nights at the convenience store. Sure, I knew it wasn't the safest job in the world, but I needed the money. Being an international exchange student meant I had to cover a lot of expenses myself, and the only shifts I could get were the ones nobody else wanted, the graveyard shift. The store wasn't in the best part of town. At night, it became a gathering spot for the kind of people most would rather avoid. Drifters, gang members, prostitutes, and the occasional drugged-out regular who'd wander in, staring at the shelves like they held the meaning of life. Cops rarely came by unless they were called. Even then, they usually just took their time, knowing by the time they arrived whatever had happened would already be over. Despite that, most nights weren't as bad as I had imagined when I first started. A few tense moments here and there, but nothing I couldn't handle. At least that's what I told myself. But there was one night that changed everything. One night that still haunts me. It started like any other. Quiet, eerie in the way only 2 a.m. can be. But that silence didn't last long. She walked in just past 1. At first I barely registered her presence, too busy staring at the CCTV monitor, watching a couple of guys argue outside. When I finally looked up, I froze. She was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark, tattered clothes. But it wasn't her appearance that set me on edge. It was her eyes. Empty. Hollow. Like there was nothing human left inside. And she was holding an axe. Not just carrying it casually, but gripping it like she was ready to use it. My stomach tightened as she stopped just inside the doorway, staring at me. Neither of us moved. Ma'am, you can't bring that in here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Her lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You mean this?" she asked, lifting the axe slightly. I swallowed hard. "Yeah, that." She took a step forward, then another. My hand instinctively moved toward the counter where the panic button was. Before I could press it, she raised the axe and slammed the blade down onto the counter between us. The impact sent a shudder through the cheap plastic surface. My breath caught. For a second, I thought she was about to swing it at me, but instead she leaned in, lowering her voice. "You know this axe means I can come in whenever I want, right?" I tried to keep my face blank, but my pulse was hammering. "You see that glass on the door?" she continued. "This axe would go through it like it wasn't even there, so don't tell me what I can and can't bring in here. All right?" I nodded slowly. A long silence stretched between us. Then suddenly she exhaled sharply like she had lost interest. She reached out, wrenched the axe free from the counter, and turned toward the door. Just as she reached it, she glanced back at me one last time. "You're lucky," she muttered before stepping outside. The door swung shut behind her, and I let out a shaky breath. I should have called the police right then, but I hesitated. What if she was still outside? What if she saw me? Instead, I busied myself with pointless tasks, restocking shelves, checking the expiration dates on snacks, anything to distract myself from the knot in my stomach. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Just when I started to believe she wasn't coming back, the bell above the door jingled. I looked up, not her. Instead, a man and a woman had entered. A couple, from the looks of it. The guy was tall, mid-30s, wearing a worn leather jacket. The woman was younger, maybe mid-20s, dressed casually in jeans and a hoodie. They grabbed a few items, making their way to the register. Relief started to settle in. Maybe the night would end without anything worse happening. But then the door opened again, and she was back, axe still in hand. This time her expression was different, darker. The guy at the counter noticed her immediately, his body tensed. "What are you looking at?" she snapped. He didn't answer right away, just glanced at me before turning back to her. "Why are you carrying that axe?" he asked. Her grip tightened. "Why do you care?" "Because you could hurt someone with that thing." She stared at him for a long moment. Then, in a voice that sent a chill down my spine, she whispered, "You're right." And before any of us could react, she swung. The axe struck the man's shoulder with a sickening thud. Blood sprayed across the linoleum. His scream tore through the silence. The woman beside him shrieked, stepping back in horror. The man collapsed, clutching his shoulder as crimson seeped between his fingers. I fumbled for the phone under the counter, but my hands were shaking too much to dial. The woman tried to run, but the attacker was faster. She swung again, catching the woman in the back. The scream that followed was something I'll never forget. The injured man, barely conscious, reached out weakly as if trying to protect her. For a split second, our eyes met. Then his arm fell limp. I thought they were both dead. I thought I was next. Then, suddenly, something changed. Her posture shifted. Her face twisted into something almost confused. She looked around wildly, as if realizing for the first time what she had done. Then, without a word, she turned and ran. I don't remember calling the police, but they arrived minutes later. Paramedics worked frantically to stabilize the victims. To my utter shock, they were both alive. Barely. The woman who had attacked them was found not long after, still wandering the streets, swinging the axe at shadows. She was arrested without a fight. The strangest part? Later, when asked why she did it, she claimed she couldn't remember a thing. No motive, no explanation. Just blankness. The court sentenced her to 9 years in prison, later extended to 14. But a longer sentence doesn't erase the memory. It doesn't erase the sound of that axe hitting flesh. It doesn't erase the hollow look in her eyes. It doesn't erase the fear that someday she might get out, and that maybe, just maybe, she'll remember me and come back. I never wanted to work the overnight shift at a 7-Eleven, but when bills pile up and you've got no other options, you take what you can get. The job was supposed to be easy: stock shelves, ring up customers, keep the place clean, and stay awake until sunrise. Nothing too exciting, nothing too dangerous. But anyone who's ever worked a graveyard shift knows that strange things happen when the world goes quiet. This particular 7-Eleven sat off a near-empty stretch of highway, open 24 hours but dead quiet past midnight. The only people who ever stopped by at that hour were truckers, drunks, and the occasional lost tourist. I'd worked there for 3 months, and the most eventful thing to happen was a guy trying to pay for a six-pack with a handful of foreign coins. But that night was different. That night, I walked straight into something I wasn't prepared for. I pulled into the parking lot at 11:45 p.m., 15 minutes early for my shift. The store was strangely dim, the flickering fluorescent lights giving off a sickly glow. I could already tell something was off. Usually, I'd see Jason, the guy on the previous shift, leaning against the counter scrolling through his phone. But through the glass windows, I saw him standing dead still behind the register, staring straight ahead. I stepped inside, and the automatic chime beeped overhead. Jason didn't acknowledge me. No, "Thank God you're here," or "Ready for another long night?" Just silence. I looked around. There were 2 customers in the store, but neither was acting normal. One guy was in the chips aisle, hands buried deep in his pockets, staring at the floor. Another was by the coolers, his forehead pressed against the glass door, breathing slow and heavy. The tension in the air was thick, and my gut twisted with unease. "Hey, Jason, you good, man?" I asked. His eyes flicked toward me, but he said nothing. I frowned. "You feeling all right?" That's when I noticed it. His hands were shaking. Something was wrong. But my bladder was screaming at me, and I figured I could figure out whatever was going on after I took care of business. I walked toward the restroom at the back of the store, avoiding the guy by the coolers. Then I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. Behind one of the shelves, crouched low, was a man. His clothes were dark, his face partially obscured by shadows. I barely had time to process what I was seeing before he sprang up in front of me. I stumbled back as he yanked up his shirt, revealing a gun tucked into his waistband. "Don't move," he said, his voice low and sharp. "Don't say a word." My mouth went dry. I nodded. Now I understood why Jason was frozen in fear, why the other customers looked like mannequins. I had walked straight into a hostage situation. The man's eyes were wild, darting from me to the others in the store. He was sweating, his fingers twitching near his waistband. He was nervous, unstable, the worst kind of person to be holding a weapon. "Go back to the front," he ordered. "Stand by the counter, and don't look at me." I obeyed, my heart pounding as I shuffled toward the register. Jason was still staring straight ahead, his hands gripping the counter like it was the only thing keeping him upright. The gunman turned away and started rummaging through the shelves, stuffing things into a backpack. I kept my eyes on the hot food display in front of me, the rotating metal trays spinning dried-out hot dogs under buzzing heat lamps. The sight felt surreal, absurd even, given the situation. I needed to think, needed to do something, but my body was locked in place, frozen by fear. Then, a sudden stupid thought hit me. I still had to pee. It was ridiculous, but the urge was unbearable. Fear does strange things to your body, and right now every nerve in me was screaming. I clenched my jaw, trying to push the thought away, trying to focus on anything else. The gunman kept muttering under his breath as he shoved more items into his bag. Packs of cigarettes, bottles of alcohol, anything small and valuable. Time stretched, every second dragging on like an eternity. And then, in a moment of pure panic and poor judgment, I made a run for it. I bolted for the door. I barely made it 2 steps before a deafening bang filled the store. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. The next thing I knew, the gunman was behind me, his hand gripping the back of my neck. He leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear. "You're real stupid, old man," he whispered. "Next time you try something like that, the bullet goes through you." I swallowed hard and nodded. He shoved me forward, and I stumbled back into place near the counter. My pulse was racing so fast it felt like my heart might explode. Then outside, the sound of sirens, flashing red and blue lights filled the parking lot. The gunman cursed under his breath. "Damn it, this is your fault," he hissed, glaring at me. "You wasted my time." He turned his gaze toward the front windows, assessing the growing army of cops outside. "All right, listen up," he said, gripping my arm. "We're walking out of here together. You're coming with me." My stomach dropped. The glass doors slid open and the cold night air rushed in as we stepped outside. The police were already in position, guns drawn, shouting commands. "Drop the weapon! Let him go!" The gunman ignored them, dragging me toward a car parked at the front. I had no choice but to go along with it, even though I knew this wasn't going to end well for either of us. Then, out of nowhere, movement from behind, a blur of motion. The grip on my arm was ripped away, and the gun was wrenched from the man's hand. I stumbled forward and spun around. It was Jason. He had tackled the gunman, wrestling him to the ground. For a moment there was pure chaos, shouting, struggling, the clatter of the gun hitting the pavement. Then, just as quickly as it started, it was over. The police swarmed in, pinning the suspect down. Within seconds, he was in handcuffs, his face pressed against the cold concrete. I stood there, my whole body trembling, my mind still processing everything. One of the officers approached me. "Are you all right?" I nodded weakly. Yeah, I think so. We need to take your statement. Can you come down to the station?" I exhaled heavily, rubbing my face. Then, despite everything that had just happened, I said, "Can I use your restroom first?" The officer blinked at me, then cracked a small, understanding smile. "Yeah, I think we can arrange that." And after that night, I never set foot in a public restroom again.